Hi there, I'm Jennifer Stewart.
And I'm Catherine Clark, and we're so glad that you're joining us today for The Honest Talk.
We're excited to be bringing you conversations with some of North America's most inspiring women, and we are thrilled to be partnering with RBC as we do so.
This podcast is about leaving behind the talking points and diving into the real, authentic, and unique personal stories of our guests. Stories which we hope might influence or inspire your own journeys.
So let's get right to it.
Today on The Honest Talk, we're joined by a woman who is shaping the future of business in Canada, and that's Candace Laing, President and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. She was appointed just last year, and from her roots on the Prairies to the boardrooms of Canada's most influential organizations, Candace has always brought a thoughtful, people-first approach to leadership. She's a really big picture thinker, and she's got a deep understanding of what Canadian businesses need, not just to survive, especially right now, but also to thrive in a world that really is changing so fast.
Yeah, and today we're really excited to talk to Candace about how you lead in these really challenging and turbulent times. And also, we bring more women into the decision-making process. And, as you mentioned, Catherine, Candace really has a bold, unapologetic vision for Canada, and it's really needed. So, Candace, welcome to The Honest Talk.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
It's our pleasure. Now, Candace, you're at the helm of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. It's one of the most powerful business organizations in our country. But can we rewind a little bit and talk about what path led you here?
Well, I'd have to go all the way back to the family farm in Saskatchewan, where I grew up. And Jennifer, if you grow up on a farm and everybody pitches in and takes on certain jobs, but if you start breaking expensive farm equipment and your leasing capabilities are starting to cause damage, maybe your family says, okay, maybe it is okay that you go off to business school and don't stay on the farm with us, but you're welcome anytime to come back and help. And so that was the start of my path. I love the farm. I love going back today, and it is very grounding for me. But my natural talents and gifts took me to business school, and that's where I started my career and still am today.
You know what I love about that is that one of the things that, gets talked a lot about in business type circles, and certainly startups and such, is to break things. So clearly you had that lesson down pat right from the start. Just you're not breaking actual physical farm equipment now. You're just breaking ways of thinking and rebuilding new ones. So
Yeah.
talk to us about some of the lessons from your upbringing, like growing up on a farm, that stuck with you as a leader through your career up to this point.
Yeah, well, I think the obvious one that gets talked about a lot and people who come from the farm is your work ethic, right? Because everybody pitches in if you're on the farm. And so there is that. But I think there's this notion of if something needs to be done, it is up to you. So the ability and willingness to engage, you're never really sitting back. I think that is so important because it's easy to think, well, maybe that's not for me, but on the farm, it's for everybody. Like if you're there, you're part of the action and you lean in and you are helping because and it's everything from like, there's nobody there to take out your garbage. You work with your own garbage and you solve every problem on your own as a team. And everybody pitches in. So I think that like leaning in and just engaging comes alongside that work ethic for sure.
Candace, when you were a little girl, when did you realize that you wanted to go to business school? You mentioned that, your strengths necessarily weren't managing the farm equipment, but when did like business dawn on you as something that you could really grasp and run with and be successful with?
Okay. Well, I'll share two things with you. So, my dad tells the first story, as does my mom. Because there's also no daycare on the farm. You are in tow as a little one alongside. And it was me and my brother. And my brother if they sat him down and said, stay here, and, because it's safe, and he would stay there because he was fascinated by, the auger running and watching everything. And with me, they would put me down and say, okay, stay here. And I'd be like, oh, but I can go do this or follow this butterfly. Like I was just like interested in, a lot of creating and other things I could do on the farm as opposed to, moving the grain that day if that was the task. So I sort of knew some of those, you know, traits were already different between me and my brother, who I say was born the farmer. And he had, to this day, he runs the operation with his lovely family. Um, but the second thing that I think ignited my interest in business and leadership was actually watching my dad, who was the farmer. But he would work all day, and then he would come in and shower and have some dinner, and then he was off to board meetings. And that might have been the community rec board, so we could keep the rinks going and the arenas going, or it might have been the credit union board to keep those services, available for the community. So that was just something um, that I thought everybody did. You just pitch in your community and that leadership as well. But there was one other person, and she was a neighbor, and she's gone now. She has passed, but her name was Joan, and I would see her drive past our farm very often, going into town, like Swift Current in Saskatchewan. About 15,000 people. But she was the mall administrator. So not only as a teenage girl on the farm in the 80s did I think the mall was pretty cool, but if you could run the mall, and she dressed in her business suits, and she had so many good stories of just in the community. She was often the only woman in the room, and she was the businesswoman, and I just thought, she can do it. She's off the farm and doing this, and so maybe I could too. And so I think that inspired some of my wanting to be that woman in business.
I
But I
love
don't
that
I
you're
don't manage them all today.
but you work with people who do in some cases, right? Like you're so talk to us. You have this fascinating background that really combines the elements of absolutely unequivocal hard work, which comes from growing up on a farm. And then you have the giving back element, which you've described, showing your dad, who was really giving back to the community in which you lived and leading by that example. And then you've described also having a female role model who showed you that that you can be the only woman in a room and that you can lead successfully doing that. And in the current role that you're in now, and maybe in some of your previous roles too, there would be situations where you're walking in as, a leading woman in the room, a younger woman. And I wonder if you can help us describe what goes through your head in those situations. Are you feeling completely comfortable, or do you have you had to work yourself up to that point?
Oh, definitely. Work myself up to that point. I would say my career has been a lifelong journey, somewhat of a crisis of belonging. So, um, I maybe didn't think I belonged on the farm given my interests and, as we've discussed, my aptitudes. But the world of business, the business culture, it's built by men for men, and we're only starting to really, turn out of that now and really bring diversity to business culture, which is so important. That's a passion of mine because it's about leadership, and leadership needs to bring a balance of masculine and feminine qualities. But so often in my career, of course, I've been the only woman in the room, and I spent more than a decade in a very male dominated industry. But having said that, the balance of, that feeling of, do I belong here? And how do I, make sure I'm resilient? I have to say that so many nudges, and I've had several of them throughout my career, um, even more of those critical nudges in my career. Some of the critical ones come from women, but the majority of them have come from men in my career saying, yes, you can, and yes,
Mm.
you should be here, and you should, go for this opportunity or this position. And I have mixed feelings about that. I'm so grateful for those nudges. And I love, conversations like this because I hope they do nudge others. And we do need those external influences. But I say mixed feelings because as I look back on my career, I think, well, why didn't I have that within me and within myself along the way? But I think that's the human experience is us, going through that and struggling with that and finding our way to a place where we feel that we are enough and we do belong. And less and less, hopefully, as one progresses in their career, do you need to rely on those external nudges?
In your role, Candace, how do you intend to kind of take that lesson learned of, a little less reliance on potentially mentors? And I know you recognize that that's great, and others pushing you along. How do you intend to take that lesson learned and push other female leaders into executive roles within the Canadian ecosystem?
Yeah. And again, I think, discussions like this, being very transparent and open about what that journey's been like, and, being very comfortable, even myself, in sharing, please don't assume you think, oh, she's made it there on her own, or, just being um, very willing to share what the journey has been like so that others' journey can be accelerated would be part of my goal. Because I think what happens is if we don't share and we don't, have conversations like this, it's so easy to uh, for women and others to use a false measuring sticks, and they only see the results. They don't see the inputs and what that journey was like and how they can, maybe accelerate some of that internal work as well. So I think that is absolutely critical that we share those stories, and I'm getting more comfortable sharing mine, right? Because it does, and I think this is so important with leadership. Where does vulnerability fit in that? And I think vulnerability feeds. Um, it's so important because sharing that vulnerability helps others understand and see themselves on the journey as well, because they can easily take themselves out of the journey or think, yeah, that's not my path. Couldn't possibly, because they can't see themselves in it. And that's a sad outcome that I hope to make an impact around.
It's really interesting that you mentioned the word vulnerability because Jen and I were just having a conversation with another woman who was talking about the importance of it. But my question was, for a lot of women, vulnerability isn't something they're really looking to show in a leadership role because they've had to fight so hard to get to where they're at. But I absolutely 100% hear you about if you're not modeling exactly what it's like and being authentic about the experience that you've had and are having, then what's going to change? So what advice do you give to women who do want to lead but are held back by a fear or self-doubt or a sense of imposter syndrome? How do you what do you tell them?
Yeah, one of the things that I do like to talk about is, and especially when we're having discussions about the path to gender equality, it is so easy to talk about the external barriers, and they are there, right? There are things that hold us back, or the same thing, with the double bind that can accelerate, be accelerating for a man can be detrimental and hold back a woman, if we're too assertive. And so those external barriers, they are there and they do exist. But I always challenge women to think of, okay, if those were magically just gone one day, are we going to move the needle enough and be where we need to be? And then I start to unpack the balance of those internal barriers. And some of those internal barriers are, what? We need to recognize we do think differently and we do have different behaviors. When we look at a job posting, we show up differently sometimes as women. And with then the other challenge, which is so common, is self-care or balancing life roles. Well, we own part of that. And we have mindsets that if we don't challenge in ourselves, we'll never win because you can't possibly be 100% in two worlds. That just is a formula where you're failing in both. So if we don't challenge ourselves and learn to manage those trade-offs, we're going to be in trouble. And then this is a tough one. I had to manage some of my own behaviors because my behaviors, and I was recognizing this after many times settling into a male-dominated industry, my some of my behaviors were perpetuating those biases towards women, and I was signaling, deference where I shouldn't be, and so that could be the way I speak or my behavior in the space I take up at the table. Like these are things probably you've talked about in other conversations. Or one of my rules is I will no longer serve the cookies because you have a lot of catered lunch meetings and everybody eats, and then nobody brought the cookies or, and I would get up and make sure, pass the cookies around. And now just a stupid rule I have, but I get up, I get my own cookie, and everyone else can get their own damn cookies. That's because if I'm the only woman in the room, I'm just inadvertently, even though I think it's a kind and caring thing to do, if I'm the only woman in a room with a table of men, I just don't serve the cookies. So.
Love it.
But Candace, you stepped into this role at a time when Canadian businesses are facing so much uncertainty, from inflation to geopolitical shifts to what does the future of work look like? What do you see as the biggest challenges ahead?
Oh gosh. In terms of, where I hope to sort of help and leave a mark is as much as, business needs supportive policy to thrive. I think we're in a time where business needs to lead and be comfortable leading and lean into that agency. And if business is going to do that, we need all leaders to be able to do that. And that includes all of us, coming back to your comments, Catherine, about how important vulnerability is. It's also about connection to our communities and our businesses, and being comfortable um, in vulnerability means you can actually really, really connect with people. And so I think in a time where we're looking at a reinvention of Canada and ourselves, connection plays a huge part in our path forward. Business has a huge opportunity to lead, and that's going to, I think, be a great opportunity for individual leaders to really, really grow and shine in that. And that's what I hope to be able to contribute to.
You're leading an organization that has a long and important history in Canada and in the Canadian business community. But there aren't a lot of examples within that organization of women at the top. How are you approaching your role differently than past leaders have? And this isn't meant to be a criticism of how
Yeah.
past leaders have approached it, but going into this, what was your mindset of how you were going to do things differently?
Yeah, well, there's an interesting fact about the chamber network, and the majority of leaders in the chamber network and in chambers across the country happen to be women. So I feel in really good, strong company because we get together as a chamber network. We have an annual general meeting and convention and speak often, and so I feel well supported. And when I need inspiration for what we should be focused on at the federal level, Catherine, I do look to those community chambers because I think they have it in spades of what needs to be done. And it actually gets closer to the farm, right? Because a lot of those communities are small, and it's not that much different in a small rural community than the farm. You look around and the people who are there, it works, the community works because everybody does their part and leans in and pitches in and asks, how can we solve this together? And, for some of these tough issues, whether it's, homelessness or housing, that's what I do in approach. I said, if we're struggling with this at the federal or national level, let's turn to our grassroots and really lean into how our communities are really convening themselves to tackle this and glean our best solutions from those circles.
Candace, if you could go back and give that little girl on the farm who was busy chasing the butterflies, any piece of advice or guidance, what would it be?
Well, one piece of advice early on, and it was one of my first leadership coaches, gave me the advice, um, trust the process. And it is a process of becoming. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I wouldn't tell that little girl, like, you have to be all who you are on day one, because what would be the point? And so embrace and trust that journey. And then know it's a journey. That same leadership coach, I was in my early 20s, also really gave me a hard piece of advice, incredibly supportive, but said, I don't see you being the leader I know you can be. And so, knowing there's space for growth, embracing growth, but then appreciating that it is a beautiful journey of becoming, and you can embrace that, as opposed to feeling you're not enough, not worthy. I think at the end of that journey, the most beautiful place to be is one where, as an individual, you can embrace fully your self-worth.
We like to end our conversation sometimes with kind of some rapid fire questions, some fun questions. And you can take this wherever you want, but is there one book that you think every leader should read?
Oh, um, Leading at a Higher Level, Ken Blanchard. And the reason for that is, so this is rapid fire, but
No,
I
it's
took
okay. You can't, right? You can explain.
like fail. um, And the reason is, several years ago, I was speaking at a leadership conference, and I was waiting in the wings of the stage with Ken Blanchard. I had to speak right after him. And I'm like, for gosh sakes, couldn't I speak before with him? Like, I have to follow him because he's like, legendary in terms of, his insights, especially decades ago when we were making that big shift from, being a leader is not you're calling the shots. Being a leader is you can actually motivate, people and systems to get things done together. And so people often ask, what's involved in that? And there's so many things, but Ken Blanchard, Leading at a Higher Level, not only gives an overview of kind of the key aspects of that, from leading change to, leading a strategy or people, but my favorite part of that book is, I think it's in chapter 15. He's like, you have to develop your own leadership point of view. What drives you? Why are you even doing this? Where did your individual unique stamp on leadership and your philosophy even come from? You should know that, and you should be able to share that with others. And so he outlines in that book a process for that exercise, which I just think is amazing.
I love that. What's your go-to way to unwind after a tough day?
Mixed martial arts. Let's
I love that.
I
How long
fight.
have
I
you been
fight.
doing that?
I fight with my family, and we love it. So I have two boys, and we're all in martial arts. And I have a good women's group I train with, and often men as well. And so I have trained for years in my hometown of Saskatoon, and I joke when I moved to Ottawa. I joke, but it's a true story. I found my martial arts gym before I found a place to live. So
Love it. Okay. Wine, whiskey, or water?
oh gosh.
It can be all three.
Yeah, all three are good. I am favoring whiskey sours these days,
Oh,
because my version of my Fitbit was telling me wine was not serving me well.
oh.
And I would say, if I could modify that with what are the top three, I would add coffee.
Okay,
Absolutely.
because we wanted to also know coffee or tea.
Yes, I
Coffee.
coffee. Yes.
Okay. Last question. Best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh my gosh. Best piece of advice doesn't stand out for me as much as the worst piece of advice I have ever had, which was from uh, a male CEO who said to me, Candace, just fake it till you make it. That's what all of us men do.
Ooh.
And I said, thanks, but no thanks. That is absolutely the opposite of what I believe
Mhm.
at my core is so very important, which is, authenticity, own where you need to grow and embrace that journey.
So then I know we said this, that was the final question, but if I just can really quickly build on one final question. When you think about that, then what do you want your legacy as a leader to be, Candace?
Um, oh, that's a good question. I've been reflecting more lately on should we focus on legacy? And, does actually legacy serve us well, take us off course? It's just a question, but it's just in the last few weeks. And I wish I could remember what instigated that reflection, but it was someone, I was listening to someone else speak, and their words gave me pause because I thought, does actually focus on legacy serve us well? Um, I do want to have impact, and I do want to inspire, as I said, others accelerating their own journeys. And and so if that fits with having legacy, I would frame it maybe more as lasting impact, but that does motivate me and drive me on a daily basis.
Yeah, I really love that. I love, because that's food for thought too, for everyone listening and for Jen and myself as well, as we kind of plan our paths forward too. I love that twist on, is legacy the right way to be thinking of it? Thank you, Candace, for being a part of this conversation. It's really been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that's a wrap. And to our listeners across Canada and around the world, we thank you for joining us.
You can hear The Honest Talk on iTunes, Spotify, and Simplecast, brought to you by RBC. You can also get more information on stories that matter to you at our website, thehonesttalk.ca, and sign up for our weekly newsletter where you'll get fabulous stories delivered right to your inbox.
But for now, thank you for being a part of today's podcast. Stay tuned for more great conversations and stay well.